about what we do here in our distillery. I really believe in that. I believe in what we do and how we do things. So please, if there's any questions, anything that doesn't quite make sense or seem different to you, please ask me, for sure, 100%. So with that, I'll tell you a little bit about me. Yeah, I grew up here in Lynchburg, born and raised. My grandfather was the distiller here as well. He started working here in 1957 and became, what we would call a master distiller today in 1966. There was no such thing as that title in 1966 here. Head distiller, distillery manager, whatever you want to call it, is what he would have been called at that time. I think he was already retired by the time somebody actually called him a master distiller. So that was never really much of a title here. Anyway, I think it really probably generated more from the marketing side of things really than really the production side. But the role now is it's really shifted as has American whiskey has changed a lot as well, right? The whole climate and dynamic around American whiskey is much different. So the role of master distiller is probably different at every single distillery out there, I would guess. But my granddad will always be, in my opinion, the truest definition of a distiller. Every day he was in here, starting to distill, and even Christmas morning, my mom would say, he would go in 4:30 in the morning, start to distill, come home about 7 when my mom and her sister would wake up to open presents. Santa Claus came, and then he'd come back and finish the day. It's just what it was back then. Of course, when you were growing faster than you can keep up, and this product right here was allocated at the time in all 50 states, almost his entire career. It was completely sold out all the time. People couldn't get it, couldn't find it. And so they were expanding this distillery by 20,000 barrels every 6 weeks. Just unbelievable growth, what they were doing back then, all while maintaining, obviously, the consistency of the product. So we owe a lot to what he did and what his team did back then to kind of get us to where we are today. And the reason that history is important is because we were able to then reinvest in our production process. And that's a luxury that not many brands had in American whiskey through the 70s, 80s, 90s. American whiskey was not nearly what it is today. And so what's done? Try to make it cheaper, right? That's what you do when it's a tough time in your industry. We were able to thankfully maintain during that time, if not even grow a little bit more. And so this process and how we make whiskey and this process that I kind of grew up around is really important to me. I'm a chemist by education, started working here in 2001. Part-time in the summer, started full-time in 2003 in Louisville at the Brown-Forman headquarters there. The Research and Development Lab is located there in Louisville. Spent almost 10 years there in R&D. Really was a great spot to start. Was exposed to a lot of different spirits and Kentucky whiskeys, and we acquired tequila business and Canadian whiskeys. All these different things that I got exposed to in R&D that I wouldn't have gotten exposed to any other way. After about 10 years there, I left, went to another producer for a couple years, almost 3 years as their lead chemist. Had a great time there, worked with a lot of great people, and then had the opportunity to come back here and start in 2014 as assistant master distiller. And so it's an opportunity to come back home, but more importantly for me to be able to work in this distillery. Again, kind of back to the process of what we're able to do and how complete our team is here. From the time we bring in a load of corn or rye or malt, from that point on, only our employees, our people, control what's going on with the product, right? It's not happening many places. And so that's something. Sorry, Zach?
Yes.
You need a drink?
I knew I was going to do that.
I don't have any Coy Hill left, so you're out of luck there. You need that to clear you up, but and it would. But anyway, back to the process. That's what really I think separates us, and we've got a wonderful history here. It's a great place to make whiskey, but our process and how we make whiskey is the most important thing to me. So we're going to taste kind of across our recipes today to kind of start at the beginning. Just the grain bills. The triple mash obviously is going to have all 3 of our grain bills added. Need some more water.
Sorry. Thank you.
Look him up there. Get you hydrated. Too much brisket.
Exactly. Spice.
So, 3 grain bills. So our Tennessee whiskey grain bill here, in here, or our bourbon recipes, 80% corn, 12% malt, and 8% rye. The rye whiskey is 70% rye, 12% malt, 18% corn. And then, of course, the single malt that we've just announced and launched, which we'll get a little taste of in this one, is 100% malt, 100% malted barley. So you might have noticed at least 12% malt in everything that we do, and that is on purpose. There is a very good reason for that. That is because we only utilize the natural enzymatic power of malted barley to convert starches to fermentable sugars. So the role of mashing is to take whole cereal grain, expose the starch, and break that down into sugar, right? Sugar is the building block of starch. Starch just happens to be hundreds and thousands of them all bonded together. Those bonds will not break with water and heat. We can cook it all day long. We can use pressure cookers or jet cookers. We don't. It's all atmospheric here. But we could. It still would not break down starch. Right? And you know that if you cook, if you add cornstarch to something it thickens, right, it will not dissolve. However, if you took table sugar and water, it does dissolve. Simple syrup, right? Nice and clear, right? So that's what we have to do. We have to solubilize the sugars to make it to where the yeast can then ferment it. Starch is not even seen as a food source for yeast. It's not even consumable for yeast, right? It's way too large of a molecule. So that's why 12% malt, at least in any grain bill that we do. Why is this important? We don't have to do this anymore. We could supplement with additional enzymes that we could source, through a chemical supply company. It's much more efficient. It's obviously a lot cheaper than bringing in malted barley. It's been grown out in Montana and sprouted or malted and shipped down to Tennessee. But that's the way my granddad made whiskey, right? Nothing but the natural malted barley enzyme. And we can measure today that the malted grain will break down that starch into a double sugar, right, called maltose, right, instead of breaking it down all the way to the smallest form, which those commercially available enzymes would do. That would speed up fermentation. It would make alcohol faster. All things better for cheaper and more efficient, but would also very likely change the flavor and character of our product. Slowing down the fermentation, extending it up to 7 days here, allowing that yeast to not only consume those sugars and create the ethanol, but also consume things from proteins, amino acids, and things, making different forms of alcohols, right? Adding complexity and layers of different flavor. Everybody gets that sweet, kind of fruity top note on Jack. That's our yeast, right? So when you get different forms of alcohol and you get acid that's made as well, a lot of natural organic acid made in fermentation, even in whiskey itself after it's distilled, you get esters, esterification, we call it. So that's the formation of all these kind of fruity, sweet top notes: apple, apricot, banana, pear, all of these things that we know we can pick up in the nose of our whiskey. It's really started at the very beginning. So, yeah, malted barley is pretty darn important, right? That fermentation consistency is very important. The other thing that's really important is the yeast itself. The yeast is actually making the whiskey, right? Literally. Without those little guys, there is no whiskey. There's no beer, there's no wine, there's no whiskey, whatever, right? So the yeast, critically important. Now, we don't share our yeast with anybody. We do have a lab, literally right across the street is our lab on the second floor, and Janessa is our microbiologist. She is growing, I know you've seen it. She grows our yeast up fresh every single week from our mother culture that we can date back to Prohibition. And when my granddad was here in the 50s, they kept it in a jug in the creek. We don't do that anymore, right? So we've made some improvements since 1957, right? But Janessa is a fantastic microbiologist. She is cultivating and growing the yeast up and bringing it into our distillery fresh once a week, that we will scale up in what we call our yeast mash, a separate stream of mash, to then inoculate into our fermenters. Because every fermenter is about 38,000 gallons of the regular mash. It's got the corn, the rye, the malt, everything in it, and then about 1,700 gallons of yeast mash, which is just the small grain, the barley, and the rye. We don't use corn. Corn's loaded with starch. That's good to turn eventually into alcohol because it's a lot of sugar. But we want more protein, less starch in the yeast mash because we don't care about making alcohol in yeast mash. We want to make baby yeast. Of course, we're souring it naturally with our lactobacillus bacteria. Janessa is also used to it. That's okay.
That Texas drive last week.
Just need to get into the whiskey quicker.
Yeah.
All right, I'll talk fast. So the lactobacillus, we are souring naturally the yeast mash with our own lactic. Again, that is something that was just kind of back cultured and pulled out and allowed to kind of rot in the distillery over a week until a new yeast mash was made back in my granddad's day. And back, in probably the 70s and 80s, they started to take samples, and we've actually purified our own bacteria strain, which its role is to sour the yeast mash portion. The whiskey mash is soured with setback or back set up to 30%, which is the spent mash coming off the bottom of the column still, right? So it's blazing hot. It's been through the column. There's no active yeast, right? Those babies have been literally cooked. They're dead. And there's no alcohol left in it either. But there is a little bit of acid. Talk about acid that's made naturally in fermentation, so you get that natural kind of organic acid that's going to be added that's going to help protect that yeast from any potential contamination. And you think contamination, what in the hell are you doing contaminating your fermenters? Remember this malted barley that I spoke of, right? That is added into the mash cooker at a very low temperature, below about 148 degrees. That's below pasteurization temperature. So whatever was in that malt field in Montana, a little bit of it is going right in. We can't add it at a hotter temperature than that because enzymes are made up of protein. Protein will denature with high heat exposure, and then none of that enzymatic power would be available, right? Instead of making whiskey, we'd be making grits, right? You wouldn't be able to break down the starch, right? So we can't add it at a hot temperature. So the addition of that acid, that setback, and the lactobacillus that's going to make lactic acid in the yeast mash is just to acidify both of those mixtures. The yeast doesn't like it, doesn't really like a sour environment, an acidic environment, but it will tolerate it. It will tolerate it more than almost any type of bacteria. Not all, but a lot of types of bacteria. So it's basically kind of a protection for the yeast, right? That's why we do it. Questions so far?
Can you just start from the beginning?
Yep. So it starts 80 corn. Well, at this point, we're halfway through, right? So after fermentation, we get to about 12% alcohol. We will distill it then up to 70%. Our new make coming off the still. It's a double distillation process, column and then pot, called a doubler, all 100% copper. All natural copper. We do have to retray them about every 6 or 7 years. Have to replace the entire column about every 15 years or so. All solid copper. That copper does erode. It doesn't rust, but it does erode and kind of wick away. That's why you have to replace it every so often. Copper will help strip away sulfur and things that come in with the grains. If you've ever smelled sulfur water, a little bit of that sometimes will come off in your spirit. Naturally strips that away and some other things that we don't want in the whiskey. It just makes a more consistent spirit, right? So if you replace copper with stainless steel, which has been done in a lot of places, and that's okay, you have to add copper back in other ways. Scrap copper, liquid copper sulfate is used a lot. You can probably order it on Amazon if you want some. I don't know what you're going to do with it unless you've got a stainless steel column in your house. But you would get that reaction of copper and stripping away the things that you don't want. Copper catalyzes the reaction. It doesn't actually physically react, but it forces reactions to occur. It helps them speed along in the column and stripping away things that we don't want.
How many times have you replaced your stills over the years, if you know? And and I know that in general you do your best to keep the design, the shape, everything consistent. And with that, has it changed the flavor over time?
No, it hasn't changed the flavor over time. Trust me, there's been a whole lot of work to make sure that does not happen. We employ the same physical specs around the still, but on 2 different sizes and scopes. We have 72-inch columns and 52-inch columns. Okay, we've got 4 of the, no, let me take that back. We just added, no, we came back in with 4 52s and 2 72s. We're getting ready to add our 3rd 72 next year. So we'll be at 7 at that point. What's that?
This is the perfect number.
Right, perfect number. Until hopefully we have to add 8 at some point, right? But anyway, the way we run it is a bit unusual. Again, it's all copper, so every, even above and below the beer feed is copper, right? Sometimes you see people that will maybe really where distillation is occurring is in the top section of the column, right? Above the beer feed. So that's where you're getting the reflux, right? Or the refracting section. So you're getting a lot of really, really low boilers, right? that are going to, recondense and come back down. And you're getting that reflux effect in the top end of the column. So that's where really the art of distillation is going on. So that's where you really want the copper, right? And so you could kind of think, well, below that, does it really matter? I don't know, but we're not going to find out, okay? Because below that, in the stripping trays, as the beer comes down through the trays and the steam comes up through the perforations of the trays, you're getting the physical separation of just stripping alcohol away from the rest of the water material, right? Because 88% of that is water and grain solids. Only 12% is alcohol, right? And so as it works its way down, the ABV gets lower and lower and lower until it gets to the very bottom and it's zero, right? The base loss of alcohol is something that we track and make sure that it's getting close to zero. We don't want to give anything away, right? And so, one can argue that maybe just the top end should be copper, but everything for us is 100% copper. So then that hot vapor literally coming off the very top center of the still, it's piped out and down and elbowed into the very bottom floor of the still house and blown into the doubler. So we're harnessing actually the heat with that whiskey vapor coming off the top end of the column to push and drive and heat the doubler. So it's actually a thumper. We've always called it a doubler. Nobody here refers to it as a thumper. Now at our volumes and consistencies, it doesn't thump because you're not getting any condensate buildup in that line, and we also have reflux lines that would pull it off if we did anyway. But we have always referred to it as a doubler, even though we are not condensing the low line coming off the column, right? We're using that vapor to blow into the doubler where the condensate is pooled inside that doubler. And so as that vapor comes into the bottom, that's heating that condensate in the doubler, which is then boiling off of the doubler. So what you see coming out in the try boxes in the still house is actually coming off the doubler down below you, not coming from that big column that you see right next to you. So that's our design in a 2-minute nutshell. It is, to my knowledge, pretty darn unique. Vendome Copper and Brass makes it for us out of Louisville. They have forever. Even in my granddad's day, they did all the fabrication for our stills. So it's top to bottom, all copper. Additional copper rods on the top trays, up in that reflux section, right near the top of the still. It is copper stacked on copper stacked on copper. We really believe in that. So that's distillation real quickly for us. 140 proof, goes through the charcoal, 140 proof, clears water, comes out the charcoal, 140 proof, clears water for mellowing. 10 feet for the Tennessee whiskey, 10 feet for the malt, 3 feet for the rye whiskey. The charcoal is really the most effective on corn notes. Corn oil, I think, we can't measure it, but that's what I taste in the New England whiskey. Right? 80% corn, it makes sense, right? But when you pick up a glass of number 7, you don't get a lot of corn. You get a little bit, right? But for an 80% corn, 4-year-old, let's call it 52-month-old product, you would expect a lot of sweet corn coming out through there. That's the magic of charcoal. That's what it actually does. It's absorbing a lot of that kind of grainy, cooked cereal grain, cornflake kind of note that you get. It's very common in bourbon, and it's perfectly fine. It's not anything bad or wrong or any kind of off note. It's just not what we want in this product, and that's why we still run it through that charcoal. We make our charcoal here on site, hard maple. It's all burnt right over there on the other side of the hill. We burn 2 or 3 times a week because it'll last up to a year in a vat. We're tasting these vats every day. When our quality team starts to taste that cereal grain note coming through the charcoal, we know that it's like a sponge, it's saturated. We have to replace it all. So we take all 10 feet out, pack in 10 more feet. Charcoal does not add, it removes. It does not prevent us from labeling as bourbon. So this, and this, that is bourbon. If we wanted to label it bourbon, we would just change the label. It's very simple. It's not a big deal. But we are pretty proud of Tennessee whiskey, right? And we feel like, we uphold a way of making whiskey that was done here before Jack Daniel was even around, obviously. So hundreds of years people have been using this process around whiskey production. And we do feel it's important. We do feel it does make that impact in our product, and it does. And so we've always been very proud to label and identify as Tennessee whiskey. So charcoal mellowing doesn't prevent us from being bourbon, labeling as bourbon. It allows us to label as Tennessee whiskey as our preference, right? Questions on that?
Actually, a question about color.
Yep.
This might be too far away, so I apologize. But like when you run it through the charcoal, does it allow the distillate to be more receptive to the color it picks up from the barrel, or is that just because your color is very even keeled across all of these?
Yeah,
And,
really, really rich and dark. Like,
yeah. Or is it just the atmosphere of this particular place?
I believe that it's the quality of the barrel that we make is what's driving it, and I'm going to get to that in just a second. That's a really interesting point. Does it make it more receptive for absorption in the wood itself? I don't know. To be honest, we've never, to my knowledge, put new make directly into one of our standard barrels, because then that would be bourbon, right? There's no way around it. We're labeling that bourbon. You know, the only whiskey that I know of from here that may not have been charcoal mellow would have been some early corn whiskey that we did right after Prohibition. But right after Prohibition, though, the corn whiskey law was probably pretty loose, so you could probably put it in any barrel you want. I don't know in 1941 what corn whiskey would have been defined as. But it, now you cannot put corn whiskey in a new charcoal barrel, right? To separate that from the bourbon code, right? So, I don't know. You got me thinking you're going to get me way off topic if I think so longer. So, let's revisit that.
Yeah.
But let's go to the barrel and talk about the color, because I think you're right. What a great exercise. We've released. Well, first of all, this average is probably around 52 months old, so around 4.5 years. Just pour that against another 4-year-old bourbon out there on the market, look at the color, or take our 10-year-old and compare it to any 10-year-old out there and just look at how much darker it is. And that's all one thing, barrel. So I talked about the yeast, the importance of the yeast. In my opinion, yeast is the number 2 most important ingredient, only behind the barrel, right? In the barrel, all the color, over half the flavor. We're very fortunate to not have just one, but have 2 cooperages. And so the way we build a barrel, the first thing we do, we have log buyers for one thing in our company that we source the oak, they're grading the oak, we know the logs that we're getting. They're going to season for a year at the mills and then go into our 2 cooperages. We'll use kilns to get the moisture right where we want it before we start bending this thing right back into something that curves. And then we'll toast the inside. So we have what's called heating pods. And so we set these barrels, they're cylinders, the heads are not on yet. And it's just, raw oak, right? Well, just blonde oak, kind of like what you see on that stave there. Think of it like a marshmallow right out of the bag, right? White oak is kind of sweet, but there's not much complexity, there's not much depth. Well, to get great flavor in that marshmallow, what do? You toast it. Yeah, you could char it right off the bat, right? You could stick it right in the flame. But you get a lot more complex flavor if you toast it, or at least toast it first. And that's how we make this barrel, right? So it's going to, for 12 minutes, it'll go over basically a heating pod that's going to radiate heat at about 1,000 degrees. So it's smoking coming off of these heat pods. Then it will go through the char fire for only about 25 seconds. We're going to get a pretty aggressive char. I mean, this has been cleaned up, but there's a pretty good char there. This would fall on a sourced barrel between a 3 and a 4 char. And we'll source barrel, for sure, absolutely will. If nothing else, I want to know what else is out there in the barrel making world. But we will absolutely source barrels from any and every available barrel manufacturer out there to see what's going on. But the way that we toast, I believe, kind of back to your question about color, is key. That 12 minutes at 1,000 degrees, you're degrading and breaking down hemicellulose, right? Lignans, tannins, all of these things. You are creating a red layer that otherwise, if you just char, the only red layer you're getting is just residual heat that happened in just a minute or 2 of charring. As opposed to, we can measure double or triple the depth of the red layer on our barrels because of our prolonged toast. Right? It's really, really impactful. And of course you can see the soak line where the whiskey came in and pulled that. So that toast, that's where I think our barrels are, in our opinion, obviously, we make a barrel to make the whiskey that we want. Right? Sure. But we think for what we want to do, we make the best barrel for what we want to do. We've been doing it a long time, and the toasting we learned from really wine barrels. Brown Foreman used to be, used to own the Mendocino cooperage out in California. Char wine barrels, you toast them. And that's when R&D started applying toasting to whiskey barrels. And so it's a massive advantage. Things that we do, the heritage barrel that we did was that heavy toast barrel. We just finished a rye whiskey in that heavy toast barrel. I mean, it's different, man. With our single barrel special releases, that's really about the barrels, where they're aging, the barrels themselves. What are we doing? Single barrel special release. We want that to be cooperage driven type of innovation, whether it be house or barrel itself. And finishing our classic rye whiskey in that high toast heritage barrel that instead of 12 minutes was almost a half hour toast that we did on those. I mean, it is brown sugar, molasses, all these confectionery sweet brown notes that you do not expect in American rye whiskey, especially the really big 95%ers out there. This is just turning it on its ear, which is fun, right? That's why you do innovation, to do different things and showcase what we can do with barrels. And we're going to continue to innovate with barrels and innovate with different grains, start to finish. We'll continue to do that. But the barrel itself, critically important and such an advantage to be able to have our in-house cooperage operations. If you get a chance to go and visit our cooperages, please do. We would love to set you up down there. It's awesome. Really, really cool. Yep.
When you season your wood, what would you say it does to the wood on a chemical level? Is it just reducing tannins, or is it something more complex than that? Or what would you say?
We honestly, we don't take any chemical measurements or have any chemical specifications on it. We target a year. That's what we want, is a year on the yard. The big thing that does is it drops the moisture content down in that wood, and it drives a lot of the green out of the wood. So going through a stave mill, if you're running a stave mill, right, you're trying to take a log and you're trying to get as many staves out of that log as you can, right? I didn't say you're trying to make the best barrel for the whiskey in it, right? And look, great people running these stave mills. This is not a knock. But is there a little bit of sapwood in there? Yeah, I think that's good enough. That's close. There's all these things that are coming in with these logs that time on the yard. Number one, you can't really replicate it with kilning. You can try, but then when you kiln something down in a month that should have taken a year, and then you bring it into the cooperage, and the first thing you do is bring it in and steam it and try to bend it right back. That's when that's a recipe for disaster. Broken stage. You're going to get cracks. You're going to get leaks. It's not good. And so really, it's about kind of low and slow leaching out really the sappy green part of the content of the wood. There is a lot of acidity that does leave. Yes, absolutely. There's a lot of tannins that leave. Have you ever been to a yard and you can see where wood's been sitting, just the ground. You can see how it's discolored the ground below it because it's just leaching all of that out. So yes, you are driving some tannins and things out. But I couldn't, to be honest, we don't take any chemical measurements on that, so I can't really say exactly why or what. And we've done other, seasoning experiments as well. Certainly less time, certainly more time. It's something that's interesting to see how that's going to affect, down the road. We've never tried to tease out, these staves happen to set for 18 months. These staves happen to set for 8 months, whatever. We've never teased that out because so much of what we've tried to do is make consistency. Mm-hmm. Only in the last few years have we tried to start peeling back these layers, but it is something that we are looking at for future innovation for sure. So, and the other thing too, longer on the yard is not always better because you're also susceptible to pests, to bugs. You can lose a lot of wood too. You have staves that are that wide. Now you've got double the amount of joints in a barrel. Well, that's not good either. So, double-edged sword. We ready to taste? Good? All right. Well, let's, how do we want to go about this? Need to think about it for a minute.
Shotgun a beer and then take a
Yes,
break.
no, yes, no.
Six more.
Triple blinded.
The shotgun and Red Bull,
Let's
right?
do. Yeah, we're gonna jump around. Let's. We'll start with number 7. Right. We'll start with number 7, which is on your left.
Far
right?
left.
Should be on your far left. It'll be the lightest color whiskey, so yeah, that should be a pretty easy indication. It's definitely number 7. This to me, classic. I mean, this is the building block of this, right? And of this, and even a Coy Hill. Coy Hill would have been put into this product 100% had we not done a separate release for that product. That would have been bottled in a batch of Old Number 7, no questions asked. So everything that we do, same way, right? Certainly warehouse location, length of time, yes, you can get into some really cool and different things, but it all starts with this. And to think that the recipe that started 150 plus years ago, we're still able to do different and cool and interesting stuff off of. It's pretty cool to know those guys got it right, So go ahead, jump in. Nice and fruity, sweet on the nose. Gotta get a big apricot, like a cut apple.
A little bit of that spice spark too.
You do.
Dryness, yeah.
Absolutely. Still coming out of the same great barrel. There's going to be just enough oak on the edges to kind of stand up. Obviously the versatility of Old Number 7 is what makes it what it is. I mean, cocktails, that's nice and sweet right out of the bottle. As my granddad would say, I don't have to teach my whiskey how to be good, right? That meant no cocktails.
Yeah.
Just pour it in a glass, right? Maybe a couple ice cubes, that's all. Do not put a splash of water in it. That was this thing. Yeah, if you order it with water, they're just gonna be a shot and then water. If you just order it on the rocks, they'll top off that shot, and then the ice will just melt. That's this thing he's telling me so.
Now, why was his nickname Frog?
Oh, I wasn't expecting that question. So he grew up working in the grocery store. So on the town square is the Harley Davidson shop on the corner. That was the Lynchburg grocery store. Bobo and Sons. It was my great grandfather, Mr. Roy Bobo, and my grandfather and his older brother had to work in that store their whole life, basically, until one day Mr. Motlow walked in and offered my granddad a job at the distillery. Anyway, when my granddad was a kid working in that store, there was an adult man in town, and his name was Frank Thomas. First and last name, Frank Thomas. And his nickname was Frog Eye. I guess his eyes looked like the eye of a frog. I don't know, long before my time, obviously. My grandfather's middle name was Thomas, Frank Thomas Bobo. And so old man, Mr. Frank Thomas, Frog Eye, affectionately, or maybe not so affectionately, passed down this nickname to my grandfather as a young boy, and it stuck and lasted his whole life. Most everybody from Lynchburg called my grandfather Frog, not Frank. So that's where it came from, Frank Thomas. Yeah, very interesting. Only in Lynchburg. It's a quirky place. So let's go from number 7, which hopefully everybody's had number 7 a few times before, I would guess. Good, very good. Let's jump all the way across to Single Barrel Select, second to the last. So this is Single Barrel Select. So this is 94 proof Tennessee whiskey. This is going to be between 5 and 7 years old, typically. Top floor only. So Old Number 7, we're mixing barrels from all over. It's all about consistency. Top floor, bottom floor, middle floor. Single barrel is only done top floor. Top floor is going to get a lot hotter. All right, we certainly know after that Coy Hill release that I mentioned, some of these houses, they can drive really big, bold flavors. Now this is cut back down to 94 proof, right, with water before bottling. This to me, it's just a sweet spot for me. I love it. This is where I gravitate a lot. I love single barrel whiskeys because they are a little bit different, right? And being around it, that's the fun part. When you're around it every day, and of course the consistency and the mixability of number 7, you can't beat it. But single barrel whiskey to me, just the natural variation, that's the fun part. And so you get, and if you want to go back, if you have any number 7 left and just compare side by side, I think you'll find really quite different. You're going to get a lot more sweet brown notes, sweet brown aromatics on the single barrel. Rich, caramels, heavier vanillas. You're gonna get more of that kind of bark spice, as you call it, Zach. Go ahead and jump in if you'd like. I mean, for me, that is just sipping whiskey. That's what I want.
It's nice and creamy on the end. Sort of
Creamy,
Black Forest cake.
rounded. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I love our stuff anywhere from the low 90s to the low 100s. I just think it's just a balance point. You know, I just like, 94, 95, 100 to about, 110 or so. Now certainly the big barrel proof stuff is a lot of fun too. But what I mean, as far as just approachability balanced against intensity and basically density of flavor, I think that is just a sweet spot for us. Somewhere in that 5 to 7 or 8 years, in that mid 90s to mid 100 and something proof is really a nice spot for us. It showcases a lot of our flavor, I think, in a great way. Any clear difference there? Yep, same process, same recipe. This one done 1 barrel at a time, top floor only. Obviously that heat's going to drive more evaporation, but also a lot more color and character coming from the barrel itself, which in single barrel whiskey is the whole point, right? You want that barrel to showcase itself as much as possible. That's why we only use top floor here for single barrel offerings. Now, let's go back one to our rye. This is the newest one. Newest baby out the gate here, our bottled and bond rye whiskey. So this gets into the 70% rye, 12% malt, 18% corn. Of course, bottled and bond, minimum 4 years old. This is actually a 7-year-old. We started at 7 with this. We do like our rye a little bit older. These are going to be more like 5 and 6. We like the rye a little bit older. It's kind of funny. An experience with rye whiskey at other distilleries, and our rye whiskey here has this innate sweetness, and I think a lot of it is our yeast. It's a big fruity note, and I just think it can hold, and it just holds up to a barrel really, really well. And so I kind of like the rye whiskey to be about a year older than the Tennessee whiskey counterpart, whatever. Even the single barrels, is 6 to 8 as opposed to 5 to 7 generally. And we're still learning, and we'll see where it goes and how far we can push the rye in the barrel. We're going to push and see how far it goes. It's going to be fun. But that's why this one is a little bit older, though, and you can just see the color. I mean, it's a 1 liter bottle, so that kind of cheats a bit. It's just more whiskey there. But I mean, that is just incredibly dark and rich, and just the red streak that goes through that. I mean, that's when you know the barrel's done right, when you see that red. It just looks browner and browner and browner. To me, it's like, it's not really what I'm looking for, right?
It's winter red, yeah.
Yeah, I want that streak of red, that heavy caramelized layer. That's what I'm accustomed to. Man, this one actually really kicks. Maybe coming from the single barrel, but the kind of anise black spice just kind of jumps, man, right off the nose. 70% rye, it really turned the page, isn't it? But it's very sweet and rich and dark underneath.
It's like a rock candy.
Yeah.
Really nice.
It's really sweet on the finish, especially for a rye.
Yeah.
I really like it over a rock. Just like,
Oh yeah, absolutely. All right, I tell you, classic bourbon cocktails with our rye, dynamite. Just anything with just a little bit of citrus, or just this on the rocks with a couple shakes of good bitters. Oh my God, it's just so good. It's really, really nice. And when we first made the rye in 2011, I was still in R&D. Right off the still, you had that kind of back and forth between the sweet estery fruitiness and 70% rye grain, right? And that tension that it was just right off the still. It's about, let's just get the barrel right, just the right amount of barrel. And we've done different things on it, and we've made the decision to move this over into the bottle and bond, at 100 proof. And I think it's absolutely the right way to go with it. I think it's really exciting. Rye whiskey is, really cocktail and on-premise driven, very much so. A lot of people love it neat. I'm not saying people don't, and of course I know a lot of you guys are neat whiskey drinkers. But really, I think classic whiskey cocktails is where, if you're going to do a rye whiskey, you got to make sure you can put one up out there that's going to stand up in anything that somebody wants to do behind the bar. And that was really a big thing and a big part of the thinking in bringing it out. It's bottled bar. So.
Or a good pickleback shot.
Picklebacks, yeah. I'm gonna leave that one to you too. All right.
No more water, Chris?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
I have a question unrelated to any of the whiskey that you have up here.
Uh-oh.
Seems like every time Sarah and I see, we ask you this question about American Single Malt. So why? So American, we saw your American Single Malts traveling from Heathrow
Yeah.
over, and we saw it, and it was funny. It was in the bourbon section.
Of course.
Why not?
So why?
But this wasn't probably.
I guess why make it duty free only, as opposed to American Single Malt, which is there's such a big push there now.
Yeah, I think. So I'm going to pretend to be a marketer for a second. So you'll have to take my answer as only a half truth, if that's okay. Because honestly, it's not my decision at all. I have an opinion, and our marketing team likes to at least amuse me and act like they listen to me. But I think if you look at the malt whiskey market, just malt whiskey, it kicks American whiskey's butt all over the world. We're small. This, in most of the world, that's a small brand. I mean, it gets outsold 10 bottles to 1 by Scotch whiskey. Go to Asia, go to South America, right? I mean, there's blended Scotch, just it rules. It just absolutely rules outside the U.S. And so, with American Single Malt not even being defined completely yet, which is okay, I'm not complaining. Yeah, I think it does make sense to put it in travel retail. To be honest, I think it makes a lot of sense. Because I mean, who even knows what American Single Malt is going to mean in 6 months? Who knows? Now, we're not going to change the way we make our malt, right? We're going to do it the way we do it with the type of malt that we're sourcing, and it's going to be minimum 5 to 6 years in the new charred oak, and then minimum year to 2 years probably in the cherry cask. Now, the stuff that we released originally was 3. I don't think we need 3. I think it's fantastic the way it is, but it was fantastic after 2 as well. So we'll tweak that, and as we kind of line this out and how we're sourcing our sherry casks and things, we'll continue to learn. There's a lot that we still don't know, to be fair, with our malt whiskey. But I think being able to kind of seed that across the world in I think we're in 60 some odd airports, we're going to learn a lot about what it's doing and where it's doing it in the world. And so, and the second thing is we just don't have a lot of it. We could have rolled it out in the U.S. and just sold it out. Sure. But, the U.S. has gotten, that's not on here, but all the age-stated stuff has been only U.S. All the single barrel special releases is only U.S. All of our experimental lines that's up there, that's only Tennessee. So I think, it was time to get some stuff in some different markets around the world and start, just taking the temperature of what the reaction would even be to the brand Jack Daniel's and having single malt on that label in front of the consumer. I was in Europe last week at the travel retail show in Cannes, and it's pretty exciting. People are intrigued because here is in the world of European whiskeys, we're still very young, and I would say modern type of a brand, as opposed to a lot of the really classic old world style Scotch whiskeys, which are fantastic and beautiful. And our single malt is not like that very much at all. Kind of same ingredients, but completely different process. So I think it, hopefully they'll see it as kind of refreshing, as a different take on what single malt whiskey can be. So that was kind of the thought, I think, getting it in GTR. So,
If I can ask a follow-up
Yeah.
to your question. So So you mentioned that you guys are just kind of doing American single malt your way, but I'm sure you're following TTDs like pretty close to like making it an official spirits category. Now, well, if that does occur and like these rules come into place, like, are you guys already like within those rules, or would you have to change anything the way that you make it?
We would just change the label if we needed to.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I don't know exactly the way it would go. I would assume a 100% malt whiskey from a single distillery is probably going to qualify. Goes
The
in.
rules are they're fairly flexible.
They're really
what they've
loose.
laid out. Yeah, they're pretty
Yeah.
loose. I'm sure you're in line anyway.
Yeah, it will not change the way we make our single malt, no matter what they do. So, we may have to change the label, but that's a lot easier than going back. Because, we started laying down single malt in like 2013. So, I can't go back and change that. You know what I mean? Most of that's actually already out, so long gone. But anyway, I just, we're gonna make malt whiskey in the best way we think we can make malt whiskey, right? So whatever we have to do to the label. So if we can't call it single malt and we just call it malt whiskey, that's okay with me. I don't, that's fine. I got no grievance with that.
Works for Lynchburg.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you could. I mean, the reason we went with single malt is because it's 100% malt. Yeah. So malt whiskey, in the U.S. just goes to 51%. Cool. All right. With that, we went to the rye. Let's go ahead and let's skip over triple and go all the way back to bonded Tennessee whiskey. So a lot of, and it's about a year and a half younger than the rye and Tennessee whiskey, but all the same regs still hold, obviously, as bottle and bond, and I know you guys are all familiar with what bottle and bond is. But you might say, why bottle and bond? Why now? And to be honest, we thought it would really resonate, really in the U.S., right? And this started just in the U.S., and we are taking it internationally, we are, but we started just in the U.S. It is our U.S. reg, and it's not understood at all, really, overseas. But if you think about the current state of American whiskey, and there's brands, hundreds of brands, but there's not hundreds of distilleries making those hundreds of brands. Now, I know there's lots of small micro distilleries and things, but I'm referring to, there's a handful of big distilleries that make, literally hundreds of completely different brands. And one thing you see, there's only one brand we make here. One. We make rye whiskeys, we make a blend, different things, but one brand. And so the transparency, and hopefully you guys have picked up on, I'm pretty big on transparency. Talk about doubling down when you go bottle and bond, because you have to disclose exactly where this whiskey is coming from. Imagine if every bottle of whiskey had to put the DSP on the label.
Right.
I mean, every
tequila needs a nom.
right? Well, I'll take it a step further. Every bag of chips says made in whatever Frito-Lay plant, wherever, right? I mean, it's where you're putting it in your body. This is where it's coming from.
So forgive me if I've asked you this in the past, but was this a progression from the travel bonded that you guys had a few years ago, or was that just a separate thing entirely?
Separate entirely. So the bonded 100 proof and travel retail bottle and bond, that was just 100 proof Old Number 7.
Right. That was
Just add less water to it,
Gotcha.
and it's bottle and bond. Because almost anything that we do here at 100 proof would qualify.
Right.
Right? I mean, sure, around the season change, you might have a day or two, we'd have to watch it, but by and large, we make enough whiskey in a day that you're probably not going to have to cross seasons. So this was completely different thought. This was about, really it was one kind of word, it's bold. This a bigger, bolder version of Old Number 7, really focused on, cranking up, the intensity. Higher proof is certainly a trend. I think we would all agree this is going on in the U.S. And we can go higher, obviously. But we thought, look, there's a bit of a gap, if it's just perfect. Imagine these three bottles are not here. We've got Old Number 7, you got Gentleman Jack, even a little bit lighter, really soft, 80 proof. And then you got to go all the way to single barrel, which doubles the price of this, right, at 94 proof to get a bigger, richer, bolder flavor profile. And rightfully so. It's all one barrel at a time. There's a lot of hand labor that goes into this bottle. And so we felt like there's an opportunity to offer a batch, bigger, bolder version of number 7. Get it at a great price, put it in a great package, and put a great whiskey on it. And so that was really the thought. So this is quite a bit darker than this. Obviously the 100 proof is going to help that, but we are targeting, as the whiskey comes out, right, into bulk tanks, we are targeting darker whiskeys from this bulk tank. So probably upper halves of barrel houses is going to be darker whiskey because of the heat. We're not really intentionally looking at it at the barrel to barrel level, but we are, every day we're dumping a couple thousand barrels, right? So those are going to go into different tanks, and then we are building these batches out of those darker tanks to drive more of that kind of oak bark spice that you get. Certainly more tannins on the edges that you're going to pick up, and really just a bigger overall whiskey, a bolder overall version of number 7. We're really excited about it. Of course, obviously it won the Whiskey Advocate Award last year, which was not only anybody saw that coming, but that's pretty awesome. So, anybody else? Man, you all right?
Yeah.
No question.
It's been a while since I've had this neat, and I forgot how good it was.
Yeah.
It's really nice. A little bit of cherry tobacco on the end.
Yep.
I also realized I poured a little bit heavier.
Not really.
I'm shocked.
3 fingers in each one.
Yeah, it's been a long time. It's been a long time. You've heard that.
You know we're gonna have cocktails on the hill later, right? I mean, come on, man.
But not with you like this.
That's true. This is true.
Intimate setting,
Yeah.
good friends, great conversation.
There you go. There you go. All right. Well, from bonded Tennessee whiskey, let's just go back and close out the bonded lineup with the triple mash. And so we launched this along with the bonded Tennessee whiskey, and I'll give you a little bit of the background on that. So we had gone down the road of this Project Bold, we called it, and settled in. And we, the bottle is designed after the old 1895 bottle that Jack was using the time that the bottle and bond reg was passed. Everything came together, right? It was a perfect storm. We've been working on it for a few months, and some of the brand people, the marketing people are like, hey, we've been reading these articles and things about people vatting whiskey in their home, in their kitchen. A bottle of this and a bottle of that and a bottle of that, and you mix it together and let it sit, and it tastes like this. I was like, where are you going with this, man? I don't know. And they said, well, couldn't we do some pretty cool blends? And I was like, man, I'm not much of a blender. That's not my thing. I total respect, but that's never really been where I've cut my teeth in this process. And they said, well, yeah, but we got like 2 million barrels in Lynchburg. Surely we could come up with something more interesting than somebody's kitchen sink. I was like, okay, look, if we do a blend, I said, first of all, it's going to be a blend of straight whiskeys, right? We're not doing a American blend with 20% straights or whatever, 25 or whatever. So no, 100% straight whiskey, all done. Obviously, here at Jack Daniel's, and absolutely do your thing, whatever you think's best. So we had obviously been making Tennessee whiskey, rye whiskey, and malt whiskey, and so I started looking at all 3 streams. And because we had been working on the bottle and bond, I noticed we've made all 3 within the same season. And I thought, I wonder if you could take 3 and blend them together and still call it bottle and bond. Had no idea that this would get approved by the TTB, but it did, obviously, thankfully. And so then it was just, what do we want to make the blend, right, the flavor profile? And right away, we settled in on the rye being the base, right? So this is going to be 60% liquid blend is going to be this. All right, so 60% of the liquid is the 70% rye whiskey. Okay, 20% is the 80%, I should say 80% Tennessee whiskey, and then the last 20% is the 100% single malt whiskey, right? And really, we locked in on the 60% rye very quick. It was just how much malt do we want to put in there, and just enough, really, on the mid palate. On this one, I don't tell anybody how to taste or smell your whiskey, but I just feel like you do you, right? You know how to taste whiskey. and there's no wrong way anyway. But on this one, if you hold a little bit, kind of right in the center, or as close to the center of your tongue as you can, right before you swallow, just hold it for a couple of seconds. To me, that 20% malt is just enough to give you some texture. You get that kind of malty, biscuity, toasted bread note, almost like a brown biscuit top that sits right in the center. And it's right there where you've got all that rye spice, and then when you go ahead and let it finish, it sweetens up a bit, and the Tennessee whiskey rounds it back out. So it's really interesting that, I mean, it's so different than anything that we've tasted, even though 80% of it is all components that we've just tasted. You can taste each of those spirits in there, but they all complement it. And so the triple mash, we didn't do as much of it as we did this. We don't have as much, but we are going to make more. We plan on this being a permanent expression, even though it won't, certainly not going to be an unlimited supply, but it is an everyday product, so it will continue to roll. This is about a 6-year-old, obviously 100 proof, and I just love that texture right in the center of the tongue. Maybe just back of center, but right in the middle, from side to side. There's like dark red fruit, almost raspberry, kind of red plum fruits that come through. Really, really interesting and different, because this malt has not seen any of the sherry, right? Obviously, that would disqualify it from bottling bond whiskey because it would no longer be straight malt whiskey. So this is just seeing the new toasted and charred oak barrel. So it's really quite different, and it's kind of the studious family member, I would say. It's got layers and layers of complexity. What do you think? Different?
I like that. Yeah.
I think it's amazing how you said it's a yeast, but a lot of people get banana on Jack Daniels, and I don't. But what I do on every single product, from triple mash, Tennessee whiskey, to rye, on the finish is where I get that red fruit, almost like I call it the red wine note, because it reminds me so much of a dark red wine that I taste on the back of every Jack Daniels product. It's a giveaway for me.
Mm-hmm.
But it's crazy how no matter what mash bill you're talking about, all that shines through in them all in the best of ways. It's incredible.
Yep. Thank you. And yes, I think it is the yeast. I would say, two things, to be fair, yeast and barrel. So we're really consistent in making these barrels too, and they do a great job. But the yeast is driving so much flavor. And that's why it's so important for people to know. Yes, we have a proprietary yeast here, but let me tell you how we do it, right? And it's living and breathing right there, right over there in that building. And we are looking at it every single day in that lab and growing it up, scaling it up to larger volumes and bringing it in every week fresh. This is critical. It's literally the heartbeat. And imagine outsourcing the very thing that makes your product, getting it from another company. Now that's bananas, right?
Yeah.
There's your bananas. And it's funny, you say that. I don't get banana very often either, to be fair. Now, maybe I'm a bit immune, I don't know, because a lot of people do. But I think it's just, the esters are just so much more pronounced, really. And I think a lot of it is just that extended fermentation. Slowing down fermentation with the malt enzyme, feeding the yeast that double sugar. Well, it's got to break that double sugar first, and then act and metabolize on those two separate glucose molecules, right? That's how it's living and breathing at that point. Well, it has to work a little harder for dinner, right? Bottom line. And so that's why our fermentations go longer. Well, when they go longer, that yeast has a longer amount of time to express itself and break down other things and create more and more flavor. And I think that is, I think, really unique, as opposed if we were buying a freeze-dried yeast somewhere that's only going to be 70 to 80% even alive by the time you rehydrate it anyway. Not to mention it's contaminated just via the freeze-drying process. And then secondly, if you're using commercial enzyme, it's going to just rapidly break everything down to glucose as fast as possible because they've been genetically engineered to do it. You're going to get I'm not saying a bad product, but you're gonna get a very, very center of the road product, right? You're gonna get a product that is gonna be, number one, almost wholly dependent on barrel extract. If you're sourcing the same barrel as everybody else, or pretty darn close, you're not gonna stand out much in a lineup. Yeah, you might have a very kind of centric, middle of the road, balanced flavor profile that might be appealing to a lot of people, but I don't know that you're gonna have a ton of nuance or interesting or being able to really push flavors, unless you're doing it in a different way, right? Unless you're doing it with barrels or extended aging or something like that. So, but yeah, I don't get a banana either. Every now and again, Gentleman Jack. Okay, I could go banana on a batch or two all of a sudden, but for me, it's like a really ripe green pear, fresh cut apple, juicy apple, and apricot. Those are the three that I really get.
A little fruit roll up sometimes.
Fruit roll up?
Yeah.
Okay, you got me on that one. It's been a while since I've had a fruit roll up, but now I want to try.
No, but I think as well, like for a lot of people, they have to consider that we're all professionals, so our perception is beyond that as well. For a lot of people, they smell banana because that's what they're used to smelling.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
sort of, and they're not sitting there smelling 20 whiskeys before lunch, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
they
for
latch on to what they recognize.
For us,
I get mostly banana for
Banana.
It's like 90-95%.
Yeah. I think we're down to one on the end, barrel proof. This one, my eyeballs are probably not going to let me see it. I should have worn my glasses. 128.2 is this one, but this one's sealed, so I don't even know if that was the one they pulled.
You want me to check?
If you want, doesn't matter, whatever you want to do. This is simply the barrel strength version of this. We never approve for quality anything at this high proof. We're always going to cut it with water down to approve it, because number one, we're looking at more than one sample. We're looking at lots of samples to approve. But secondly, we're trying to really dive in and not be overwhelmed with the strength of the alcohol.
I think it's same.
Same, 128 too?
Yeah.
Yep, cool. A little bit on the low end for us. We usually average between 129 and about 132. Usually the average, so a little bit below average. Yeah, just, I mean, the intensity, the density of it.
Your molasses.
Right.
Yeah, those sweet brown notes that you get, all of those sweet extracts from the yolk itself. Heavy caramelized sugar, molasses. The oak
Yeah.
just builds.
So it doesn't read as 128 like at all. It's so soft.
Yeah, and I think it's a magic of a couple things. Number one, the barrel, for sure. Again, the quality of the barrel, but also the charcoal mellowing does soften the whiskey. It really does. Grain oils are harsh and they're bitter. Corn oil is bitter, and so by removing that, that bitterness that you would catch on the edges of your tongue, which is also where you're going to catch a lot of those really hot tannins at a barrel strength. I think that's the other kind of magic of Jack Daniel's at high proof.
That sticks around forever. It's just there.
Are you ever gonna make beer again?
Not, tell you what, there's no plans. So the old brewery is where we bought the single barrel now. So I don't think that's in any time in the future, but hopefully.
You gotta fill those Coca-Cola cans now anyway.
Right, yeah, right. And,
What about, how about either a peach or an apple brandy? Have y'all ever done any of those? Or?
not since right after Prohibition.
Yeah, I know Lynn Motlow had a, I think it was under his name, wasn't it? Not his
Yeah,
name.
we did peach, apple, and I think pear was the other. It's been kicked around, but I would, you'd have to have a different still.
Yes, I think it's totally different.
Yeah, you couldn't do it through a column, and I don't think it would work out. We had talked about doing some hybrid stills or something just to play with, but I mean, when you've got this distillery,
Why do it? I didn't realize that I was doing research to trigger all the old ads from, well, the 19th century, but also the right around the early 30s.
yeah,
When there's, Jack Daniel's came back big with Lynn Motlow's peach and apple brandy.
Lynn Motlow's peach and apple brandy, also Lynn Motlow whiskey. We did until about 1991.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was a Tennessee whiskey. Yeah. Yeah, like 1 and 2 year old, really young. He wouldn't put the Jack Daniel's name on it, but he was, he was trying to make
Something like a white label.
Yep. Yeah, there's a very diverse history of making products here in Lynchburg that most people have no idea.
Yeah, there was a ton of fruit branding coming through in like 19th century.
Especially with like apple brand.
Yeah, well, it's almost dependent upon the harvest.
It's
When there was a big
too.
peach harvest, you would see peach brandy everywhere. And then the next year, you know, people wouldn't bother to fire distills and peaches. It was a real seasonal hit and miss crop every year. You look at the
Yeah.
tax numbers on it, it's like, one year is tens of thousands of gallons and next year is nothing.
Yeah. Oh, 1 year the crop's really good. It's either going to rot or you're
Yeah.
going to make brandy out of it.
Yeah, that's what everyone did, they fire up
Yeah.
distill.
Absolutely.
I have a question more back onto the distillation side. So I know on a traditional pot still, when they're doing the cuts, they're taking out the heads, hearts, and tails. But how does it work with the continuous columns?
Same,
Yeah, how do
same
you
and
put out
different.
methanol?
Oh yeah, that's, well, number one, there should be very, very small amounts of methanol in there anyway. That should be at a level that you couldn't even concentrate it if it were there to a point where it would be harmful at all.
Is it just getting cycled out through the continuous process?
Yeah, well, there's not much there to even start with. Methanol is. There's trace amounts. Yes, there's absolutely some there, but at tiny, tiny, tiny levels. But we control cuts kind of in the same way. Ultimately around the doubler, which is a pot still. So if you kind of think if we consider starting up with everything empty, so the first thing that you would do to start warming up the still would be to introduce steam, 0% alcohol, right? And you're going to start to cycle that through, and you're going to catch some condensate water in the doubler, and you're going to start to introduce beer, right? It's just going to go in the top of the column, right? And you're going to cycle that through, right, until you get it up to the proof that you're going to want. So there's very little actually of a heads cut because you're actually just recycling and refluxing that in, because there's reflux lines off the doubler and reflux lines off of the vapor feed into the doubler. So we can actually recycle a lot of the heads back through. Yes, there's a little bit that never comes over just based on the temperature and the pressure of it that will actually be cut out, and physically we leave with the tails cut. So on the opposite end is after you've been up and you've run a still, for us 24 to 30, maybe 36 hours before we'll close it down and do a clean, a CIP. So the first thing that you're going to start to cut off is the beer feed. So what's that going to do? Suddenly your ABV is going to start to tick down below 140. So we'll let it go down to almost 120 to where we'll stop it and cut it off. Now, we have low wine tanks to where we can catch that material and pump that back into a doubler at the next startup if we want. And we can do that for so many days until eventually you're going to have waste, low wine that's going to have to be shipped out of here and disposed of. So there will be a very clean and true tails cut. A lot of the heads should be still in there and contained in what goes out because it's going and it's cycling back through. It's not going to get through because of the way the doubler prevents it, if that makes sense. So the doubler is where really the true cut is made, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so the doubler essentially stops it from getting in to what you want. And then eventually as it's cycled through and eventually gets eventually dumped out.
You will get, yes, eventually you will have waste alcohol that will have to be disposed of. Yep.
Yeah.
I guess way back in the day they could just dump it. I don't know where. But would not be advisable, and we certainly don't do that today. So there are cuts. They just look a little bit different. Now, the advantage of it is, on the flip side, let's say that you wanted 140 proof off of a pot still. So you're going to have to catch, first of all, if you've only got one pot still, then you're going to catch everything from 100 to 100, as high as you could just possibly get to settle out and have a heart of 140. It's a lot more crude that they can cut, right? As to where once we ramp it up and we get to 70% ABV, we might not even bounce to 141 or bounce to 138, right? I mean, we might go to 139.4 or 140.4, but it's gonna be tight. You think, as beer goes in, there's subtle fluctuations in the ABV of beer, the fermented mash, right? So one might be 11.7, one might be 12.1. I mean, you're gonna have some fluctuation, but that's why you have people in there monitoring the still, and the top temperature of the still really is the most important piece of it. That's going to tell you where you're sitting. And we've got densipometers on them too to tell us what the proof is.
So what's your favorite way
Whiskey's
to cook
good.
brisket?
Look at that. Let's look at that.
Yeah, whiskey.
It's hot here, right?
Well, it was icebox when we first came in.
That's box. But just kind of a quick statement to you guys. You guys are so smart about this, and this thing went over my head. I specialize in trial analysis, jury selection, appellate process of murder trials, basically. So I buy this for lawyers when they are successful.
Okay.
So, but now I know I can talk to them about this.
you go.
But thank you for inviting me and having me here, because this has been a great step away from murder, meth, and mayhem.
It sounds like it.
Yeah.
I'll believe you.
Yeah, this is wonderful. Thank you.
Good. I'm glad.
Sounds like you've been spending too much time in Bardstown, though.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, you got to get out of Kentucky more.
Yeah, I'm Tennessee, but I travel all over for trials. So, yeah.
I lived in Kentucky 11 years. Love Louisville. Great city.
I have been to Bardstown now.
There's a lot of interesting true crime documentaries.
Yes,
on
there
that place.
is. A friend of mine is really doing well up there.
Yeah.
Cool.
When you drive through and be like, it's just a little small town.
Right?